She pressed her back against the wall and prayed no one would see her. That was all Evelyn Stone ever asked of this world. To go unnoticed, to survive, to disappear before anyone remembered she was there. But the moment the feared Duke Theron Blackwood turned away from 10 of the finest women in the room and walked straight toward her, slow, deliberate, certain, every quiet prayer she had ever whispered crumbled at her feet. He stopped. He looked at her. And then he said it. "Give me that one." She did not know whether to run or to weep. Neither did anyone else in that room. If this story already has your heart racing, you are exactly where you belong. Subscribe to this channel and follow every step of Evelyn's story straight through to the end, because what happens next will shake you to your core. And drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. The night had not been made for Evelyn Stone. She had known that from the moment Mrs. Holt pressed 3 coins into her palm and told her to stand near the east wall, hold the extra shawl, and do not speak unless spoken to. Those were the terms of the evening. Evelyn had accepted them, the way she accepted everything. Quietly, with both hands, and without complaint. She was not a guest at the Ashworth Harvest Ball. She was furniture. An accessory to Miss Clara Dunmore, the young heiress whose mother had hired Evelyn as a paid companion 3 months prior. Clara needed someone to carry her things and agree with everything she said. Evelyn needed the coins. It was a perfectly efficient arrangement. The ballroom was filled with the kind of people Evelyn had spent her entire life watching from the outside. Silk and powder and pearl. Laughter that cost nothing because everything else had already been paid for. She stood near the east wall as instructed, the extra shawl draped over her arm, and she watched. It was the one skill she had mastered completely, watching without being seen. She had heard about tonight, of course. Everyone in the county had. The Dowager Duchess of Blackwood had assembled what the gossips were calling the final season's offering. 12 ladies, then 10, whittled down through private audiences and ruthless elimination, all vying for the attention of one man. Theron Blackwood, Duke of Blackwood. The man they said had turned 32 without ever once looking twice at a woman. The man his grandmother had been dragging to these gatherings for 3 consecutive seasons, watching him reject every candidate with the same cold, efficient indifference he might use to decline a second helping of soup. Evelyn had no opinion about the Duke. She had no reason to. Men like that existed in a world she only entered through the servants' entrance. She shifted the shawl on her arm and pressed closer to the wall. Across the room, the Dowager Duchess sat rigid in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, her sharp eyes moving between her grandson and the 10 remaining ladies who had been arranged like a garden display around the perimeter of the floor. She was a woman carved from expectation, white-haired, unsmiling, and absolutely certain that her will and God's will were, on most matters, identical. "He hasn't spoken to a single one of them," muttered the woman standing 2 feet from Evelyn, a round-faced maid named Bess, who worked for the Ashworth household. "3rd ball this month. He just stands there like a fence post and scowls at the floor." Evelyn said nothing. "You'd think a man with that kind of fortune would at least pretend to be pleasant," Bess continued, not really talking to Evelyn so much as talking in her direction. "My mistress says he's cursed, says his heart turned to Riverstone after the war." Evelyn shifted her eyes briefly toward the center of the room. She found him immediately. That surprised her. She had expected to have to search. But Theron Blackwood was not the kind of man you searched for. He was the kind of man a room organized itself around without anyone deciding to do it. He was taller than she'd imagined, dark-coated, straight-backed, with the kind of stillness that came not from peace, but from absolute control. He stood near the center of the floor with a glass in his hand that he had not once raised to his lips, and his expression was, she searched for the word, deliberate. Not bored, not cruel, just utterly, completely decided about something she couldn't name. She looked away. It wasn't her business. Miss Stone. Clara Dunmore appeared at her elbow, cheeks flushed, voice low and sharp. Did you bring the ivory fan? I told you to bring the ivory fan. It's in your evening bag, Miss Clara. Right side pocket. Clara snatched the bag from her own wrist, dug into it, and produced the fan with an expression that suggested she would not be acknowledging the error. She snapped it open and turned back toward the floor without another word. Evelyn watched her go. She did not sigh. She had stopped sighing about things like that 2 years ago. It used up energy she needed for other purposes. The evening moved the way these evenings always moved, in slow, gilded circles. The small orchestra played. The ladies laughed at the appropriate moments. Introductions were made. Hands were extended. And the Duke of Blackwood stood in the center of it all, like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples he did not appear to notice or care about. She was watching the window, calculating whether the frost in the glass meant the walk home would be worse than yesterday's, when she heard the shift in sound. Not a commotion, not an outburst, just a change, a sudden alteration in the quality of the room's noise, the way a creek sounds different when something large steps into it upstream. She turned. Theron Blackwood was moving. Not toward the refreshment table. Not toward the Dowager Duchess. Not toward any of the 10 carefully arranged ladies who had spent weeks preparing for precisely this moment. He was moving toward the east wall. He was moving toward her. Evelyn's first thought was entirely practical. He must want something from the household staff. She began to step sideways, ready to point him toward Bess, who actually worked for the Ashworths and might know where the brandy was kept. He stopped directly in front of her. He was closer than she'd anticipated. She could see the line of a jaw that had never once arranged itself into easy charm. His eyes were pale, gray, or near enough to gray that the distinction seemed irrelevant, and they were looking at her with an attention so focused and complete that her breath caught without her permission. She steadied herself, kept her spine straight. Her mother had always said, "Whatever happens, keep your spine straight." He said nothing for a moment, just looked at her with those winter-gray eyes, like he was solving a problem she hadn't known she presented. Then, from behind him, she heard it, the sound of the Dowager Duchess rising from her chair. "Theron!" The old woman's voice carried across the room like a crack of split wood. "Lady Sophronia has been waiting to—" "I see her." His voice was low and unhurried, and it was not directed at his grandmother. It was directed at Evelyn. "Who are you?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Around them, the ripples spread. Evelyn kept her voice even. "Evelyn Stone, sir. I'm a companion. I'm here with Miss Dunmore." A companion. He said it the way someone repeats a word they're testing for weight. "Not a guest." "No, sir." "No family connections? No estate? No dowry under consideration?" The questions were not cruel. They were precise, which was somehow worse. "None of those things," she said steadily. "I hold the shawl." Something moved behind his eyes. She would not have called it amusement. It was too quiet for that. But it was something. "You hold the shawl," he said. "Yes, sir." He turned then, just slightly, just enough to survey the room behind him. The 10 ladies, the fan snapping open in agitation. The Dowager Duchess, white-knuckled around the handle of her cane. Every titled, powdered, carefully presented woman in the room watching the Duke of Blackwood have a conversation with a paid companion near the east wall. He turned back to Evelyn. "How long have you been standing here?" "Since 7 o'clock, sir." "And no one has spoken to you?" It was not quite a question. She answered it anyway. "That is generally the arrangement, sir. I am here to be useful, not conversational." "And do you find that satisfactory?" Evelyn blinked. Of all the questions she had prepared herself to answer tonight, instructions from Clara, demands from Mrs. Holt, queries from other servants about where things were kept, that was not one of them. Nobody asked her that. "It is what it is," she said. "That is not an answer." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." He studied her for another long, unreadable moment. Then he reached out and took the shawl from her arm. Not roughly, not impatiently, just decisively, as though he had decided something and was now proceeding with it. He held the shawl out to a passing housemaid without looking at her. Evelyn stared at his hands. "Your Grace." The Dowager Duchess was beside them now, voice pitched low and dangerous. "I must insist. Lady Sophronia's family has traveled from—" "Grandmother." He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I have made my decision." The old woman's breath came sharp and short. "You have not even spoken to the ladies." "I have spoken to 3 of them this season. Last month, when you arranged the garden party. They were exactly what I expected. This one is not." Evelyn's heart was doing something irregular and deeply inconvenient. "She is a servant, Theron." The Dowager Duchess said the word the way people drop something hot, quickly and with their fingers spread. "She is a woman who has been standing against a wall for 2 hours holding someone else's shawl without complaint or self-pity," he said. "That is more than I can say for most of the people in this room." "You cannot be serious." He looked at his grandmother then, and whatever was in his expression made the old woman go still. "When," he said quietly, "have you known me to be otherwise?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing Evelyn had ever heard. She was aware of the room in the way you become aware of a held breath, all at once, completely, and with the knowledge that it must eventually release. She could feel the eyes, all of them. The ladies with their fans paused mid-flutter. The men with their glasses half raised. The whispers beginning like water finding its level. And then Lady Sophronia stepped forward. She was beautiful in the way money made things beautiful. Perfectly arranged, perfectly presented, every detail correct and deliberate. Her voice, when she spoke, was velvet over iron. "Your Grace," she addressed herself entirely to the Duke, as though Evelyn were the east wall itself. "Surely you cannot mean to suggest that a woman with no family, no name, and no standing is a suitable candidate for the position of Duchess of Blackwood. The insult to every woman in this room is not my concern," he said. Lady Sophronia's fans snapped shut. "I beg your pardon?" "The insult to the women in this room is not my concern," he repeated, with the patience of a man who repeats himself rarely. "My grandmother arranged these gatherings. I attended them. I have looked. I have found nothing among what was presented to me that gave me cause to reconsider my position on the institution of marriage." He paused. "Until now." Evelyn thought she might be ill, or possibly that she might faint. She had never fainted in her life, but she was willing to consider it as an option for the first time. "Miss Stone," his voice, when it turned back to her, was different. Not softer exactly, but direct in a way that felt almost like respect. "I would like to speak with you further. Not here. Somewhere quieter." He glanced toward the side corridor that led to the Ashworth's library. "If you are willing." Every single person within 30 feet heard that sentence. Lady Sophronia made a sound low in her throat. Evelyn stood very still and thought about the 3 coins in her pocket. She thought about the walk home in the cold. She thought about her mother's voice saying, "Whatever happens, keep your spine straight." She thought about every wall she had ever stood against, in every room she had never been invited to enter. "I am not a lady," she said. "I want that said plainly." "I know what you are," he said. "I'm asking what you want to be." And there it was, the question that had no safe answer. She looked at him, really looked, the way she rarely let herself look at anything that might look back. And she tried to find the trick in it, the game, the cruel amusement of a powerful man finding entertainment in a servant's confusion. She found none of those things. What she found was something much more frightening. She believed him. "All right," she said. Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that, later, when she had time to think about it. "I'll speak with you." He offered his arm. She stared at it for half a second. That offered arm, the white of his glove, the formal gesture made towards someone who had never once in her life been offered a gentleman's arm. And then she placed her hand on it. The room erupted, not in applause, not yet. In noise, a rush of whispered outrage and disbelief that swept the ballroom like wind through a wheat field. She heard Lady Sophronia's voice cutting above the rest, sharp and unsparing. "This is an embarrassment. This is an absolute embarrassment to every family represented here tonight." She heard the Dowager Duchess say something in a tone so controlled, it frightened her more than shouting would have. She heard a dozen other voices she could not separate or identify, and she kept walking, her hand on Theron Blackwood's arm, her spine straight, her heart hammering so hard against her ribs she was mildly surprised it wasn't audible to the room. The corridor was quieter. He did not release her arm until they had rounded the corner and the ballroom sounds had softened to a muffled current behind the wall. He stopped. He turned to face her, and in the lower light of the corridor, away from the chandeliers, she saw something she hadn't been able to identify before. He looked tired. Not in his body. His posture was as rigid as ever. But behind the eyes, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. "I'll ask you something honestly," he said, "and I'd like an honest answer in return." "I generally give honest answers," she said. "I don't have enough to lose to bother with lies." He almost smiled at that. "Are you afraid of me?" She considered the question seriously. "I'm afraid of the situation," she said finally. "You are just a man." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Good. That is exactly the right answer." "What was the wrong one?" "No," he said. "I've had women tell me they weren't afraid of me when they clearly were. And I've had women tell me they were afraid to seem deferential." "You said something true. That is rarer than you might imagine in my particular experience." Evelyn folded her hands in front of her. "What do you want, sir? Not in general. Tonight. From this conversation." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want to know if you would consider something unconventional." She waited. "My grandmother's project has been to find me a wife," he said. "Her criteria: family, fortune, breeding, and what she calls suitable temperament, by which she means a woman who will not challenge her authority over the household for the first decade of the marriage. I have declined every candidate she has presented because I found them exactly as described. Suitable." He said the word like it tasted of old pewter. "I do not want suitable." "What do you want?" "Someone who has no reason to pretend." Evelyn let that sit for a moment. "With respect, sir," she said slowly, "I am a paid companion with 3 coins in my pocket and no family connections of any kind. You are a duke. There is no universe in which what you seem to be suggesting is a simple matter. I did not say it was simple. My grandmother will recover, he said. She always does. The ladies in that room will have nothing to do with it. I will be, she stopped, searched for the word. Destroyed. Publicly. The moment it becomes known that you spoke to me tonight like this, I will be finished. Every family that might hire me, every position of any kind. I know, he said. That is why I'm asking instead of assuming. He met her eyes without flinching. You have the right to tell me to go back into that ballroom and pretend this conversation did not happen. I will do it. You will never see me again, and I will make certain no one makes difficulty for you as a result of tonight. She looked at him. He looked back. Or, he said, you can tell me your honest first impression of me, and we can see whether there is anything here worth pursuing further. Not marriage, not a proposal, just a conversation, an honest one. Continued. Evelyn Stone had spent 26 years being careful. Careful with her words, careful with her steps, careful with her wanting. She had made careful a religion, because she had seen what happened to women who were not. But she was very, very tired of standing against walls. My honest first impression, she said, is that you are a man who has been told what to want for so long that you've forgotten how to recognize what you actually need. And I think you came and stood in front of me tonight, not because I am special, but because I was the only person in that room who wasn't trying to give you something. The corridor was very quiet. That is, he said, after a long moment, the most accurate thing anyone has said to me in recent memory. It may also, she said, be a terrible basis for whatever it is you are suggesting. It may be, he agreed. Are you willing to find out? She thought about the 3 coins, the cold walk home, the east wall, the shawl. I am, she said. God help me. And somewhere, on the other side of the ballroom wall, she could still hear Lady Sophronia's voice carrying on about embarrassments and family honor and the ruination of good society. Theron Blackwood listened to it for exactly 1 second. Then he turned away from it, back toward Evelyn Stone, and said, Tell me something true about yourself. Something no one in that room would know to ask. She thought. Then she said, I know how to read. Not just letters, Latin. I taught myself from a book I found in a house I worked in at 17. The family didn't know I had it. I used to read by the kitchen fire after everyone was asleep. Something in his face changed, rearranged itself into something that wasn't quite warmth, but was the shape of where warmth might eventually grow. Latin, he said. Latin, she confirmed. He said. And that single, quiet sound was the beginning of everything. The corridor felt smaller after that. Not because anything had changed in it. The walls were still the same distance apart, the candlelight still threw the same uneven shadows, but because something had shifted in the air between them. And Evelyn could feel it, the way you feel a change in weather before the clouds arrive. Something had been decided. She wasn't entirely sure by whom. Latin, Theron said again, and he said it like a man turning over a stone he had not expected to find anything under. Where did you work? At 17. A house outside of Richmond. The Caldwell family. The old Mr. Caldwell had been a scholar before his money came. His library was... She stopped herself. I was not supposed to be in it. But you were. Every night for 8 months, she said, until Mrs. Caldwell found me and dismissed me without a reference. He was quiet for a moment. She dismissed you for reading. She dismissed me for reading her husband's books without permission, Evelyn corrected carefully. The distinction mattered to her. Did it matter to you? No, she said. Honestly, no. I'd have done it again. He looked at her with those pale eyes that gave away almost nothing. But the almost was doing a great deal of work right now. How many positions have you held? 7, since I was 14. And how many dismissals? She considered lying, decided against it for the reasons she'd already stated. 4. For what cause? The reading was the first. The second was... She paused. I corrected a household account that was being embezzled. The family was not pleased. They were embezzling? The housekeeper was, but the family was embarrassed that a companion had noticed before they did. It was easier to dismiss me than the housekeeper, who had been with them for 20 years. Something moved in his jaw. Not quite anger. The shape of where anger might sit if he let it. The third, I refused a request from the eldest son that was not within the scope of my employment. The corridor went very still. I see, he said. The fourth was Clara Dunmore's mother, she continued, moving past it the way she'd learned to move past things. Steady, forward, without looking back. That one is pending. I expect it will happen within the week, given tonight. Why within the week? Because I am currently standing in a corridor with the Duke of Blackwood, instead of holding the shawl, she said. That will not go unremarked. He turned slightly away from her, and she watched him think. It was strange, watching a man like that think. She had expected someone with his power and wealth to look decisive at all times, certain, immovable, but he actually thought. He turned things over. She could see the process of it happening behind his eyes. I could speak to Mrs. Dunmore, he said. Please don't. He looked back at her. Why? Because that would make things worse, she said. A duke intervening on behalf of a companion creates a story. Stories follow women like me. I have worked very hard to not be a story. You became one tonight, the moment I walked toward you. I know that, she said. Believe me, I am abundantly aware of that. He was quiet for a beat. Then, Are you angry with me? The question surprised her. It surprised her enough that she answered without thinking. A little, she said. Yes. He nodded once, as if that was exactly what he'd expected and had wanted anyway. Good. Tell me why. Because you had a choice about what happened in there, she said, and something she'd been holding very tightly began to loosen at its edges. You could have walked up to any woman in that room, and the consequences for her would have been a story she'd be proud to tell. For me, the consequences are entirely different. I have no cushion, no family to retreat to. If my reputation is attached to something people find scandalous, I don't get to wait for the season to end and start fresh. I just don't work. And if I don't work, I don't eat. He absorbed that. She watched him absorb it. You're right, he said. I know I'm right. I made a decision tonight that affected you without asking permission first. You asked permission for the conversation in the corridor? After the damage was done. Yes, she said. After. Another silence, and then something she had not expected. I apologize, Miss Stone. She blinked. I beg your pardon? I apologize, he said again, and he said it like a man who didn't say it often enough, that the words had gone smooth from overuse. He said it like the words still had weight. I acted without consideration for what it would cost you. That was wrong. Evelyn stood very still. In 26 years, she could count on one hand the number of times anyone with power over her circumstances had said that particular sentence and meant it. She was deciding what to do with it when the door at the end of the corridor opened. The Dowager Duchess of Blackwood walked through it like weather. She was not loud. She was not dramatic. She was simply a force that had learned long ago It had no need to announce itself. She crossed the corridor in measured steps and stopped 6 feet away, and her eyes went to Evelyn first, briefly, assessingly, and then to her grandson. "This is enough," she said. "You have made your point, whatever it is. Come back inside." "I'm not making a point, grandmother." "Theron." Her voice was a closed door. "Lady Sophronia's family has connections that extend through 4 counties. Her dowry alone would—" "I'm not interested in the dowry." "You are not interested," she said, with the particular precision of someone who has held their patience so long it is calcified into control. "In anything I have ever presented to you. 3 seasons. I have given you 3 seasons, and you have treated every candidate I have assembled as though they were livestock you found underweight." She paused. "And now you stand in a corridor with a woman who cannot name her family and believe this is a solution." "I believe it is a beginning," he said. "A beginning." The dowager looked at Evelyn then, not cruelly, not with venom, but with a coldness that was almost more difficult to bear because it was simply the coldness of genuine indifference. "Girl, what is your family name?" "Stone, ma'am," Evelyn said. Her voice held. She was proud of it. "Evelyn Stone. My father was William Stone of Henrico County. He was a school teacher." "Was." "He died when I was 12. "And your mother?" 2 years after." The dowager studied her. "You have nothing." "I am aware of that, ma'am." "You have no idea what you would be stepping into." The old woman's voice was not unkind, which somehow made it sharper. "You would be eaten alive by the families, by the press, by every woman in that room, and every woman attached to every woman in that room. You are not built for this world." "With respect, ma'am," Evelyn said quietly, "I have survived every world I have been placed in so far. I don't know that this one would be entirely different." The Dowager Duchess looked at her for a long, measuring moment. Then she looked at her grandson. "She has spirit," she said, and the way she said it made it unclear whether that was a compliment or a diagnosis. "That is the only thing I will grant." "It is not the only thing," Theron said. "Theron?" "Grandmother." And now his voice had something new in it. Not harder, but deeper. Final in a way that had nothing to do with volume. "I'm going back into that ballroom. I'm going to make it clear to the assembled guests that I have made a choice and the evening is concluded. You may join me or you may remain here. Either way, the decision is made." He looked at Evelyn. "Miss Stone, will you come back in with me? You don't have to. I will understand if you'd rather not." She thought about the walk home in the cold. She thought about it seriously, for 3 full seconds, because it was a genuine option, and she was a woman who did not dismiss genuine options without consideration. Then she said, "I'll come in." The dowager made a sound that was not quite a word. They went back through the door. The ballroom had not calmed in their absence. If anything, it had reorganized its energy into something more deliberate. The whispers had sharpened into conversations. The fans had resumed their pointed motion, and every face in the room swung toward the corridor entrance with the particular alertness of people who have been waiting. Lady Sophronia stood near the fireplace, flanked by 2 women Evelyn recognized as her cousins. She was composed, entirely, deliberately composed, in the way that meant she had used the absence to prepare. She waited until Theron and Evelyn had crossed half the floor before she spoke. "Your Grace." She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room was quiet enough. "I wonder if I might speak frankly." "You may speak however you like, Lady Sophronia." "Then I will say this plainly." She looked at Evelyn then, looked at her the way you look at something you are trying to categorize. No one in this room wishes this woman ill. I want that clearly understood. But there are matters of precedent, of propriety, of what this family—" She gestured broadly, indicating the assembled guests as though they were a committee she chaired. "Represents to the county and to the society it is part of." "I appreciate your concern for my family," Theron said. "It is not only concern. It is—" She paused, recalibrated. "There is something you should know about this woman." She pulled herself to her full height. "I made inquiries when you were in the corridor." The room sharpened. Evelyn felt it. The way attention has a physical quality when it is unanimous. "Her third dismissal," Lady Sophronia said. "You know what she claims it was for. I'd encourage you to ask the Hartwell family for their account before you take hers." Evelyn went cold. Not because the statement was true, but because of all the weapons available to a woman like Sophronia. She had gone immediately for the one that Evelyn had the least ability to defend against in public. "The Hartwell family," she heard herself say, "are welcome to give any account they like." "Then you don't deny it?" "I don't know what account you've received," Evelyn said steadily, "so I cannot confirm or deny it. I know what happened. You have heard something from someone with reason to shape it differently." "The eldest son says—" "The eldest son," Evelyn said, and her voice was very quiet now, very precise. "Made a request. I declined it. I was dismissed. Whatever he has said since then about the nature of that conversation is what a man says when he wants to explain why a woman left without blaming himself." The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Sophronia opened her mouth. Theron spoke first. "I believe I have heard enough of this particular line of inquiry." His voice was still low, still unhurried, but something in it had changed. A quality had entered it that Evelyn couldn't name, something that made two men across the room take an unconscious step back. "Lady Sophronia, you are a guest in the Ashworth house. I will ask you to remember that." "I am trying to protect—" "You are trying," he said, "to protect your position. That is a different thing. I understand it, but I won't pretend not to." Lady Sophronia's fan snapped shut. "You cannot seriously intend to—" "I intend," he said clearly, to the room, to all of them, the words falling like stones dropped deliberately one by one, "to call on Miss Evelyn Stone tomorrow morning, with the appropriate chaperone present, to continue a conversation I have found more worthwhile than any I have had in the previous 3 seasons combined. What comes of that is between her and me, and no one in this room." He looked at Evelyn. She was standing in the center of the floor, not against the wall, not near the door, in the center, where the chandelier light reached, with every eye in the room on her, and she was thinking about how different this felt from every other moment in her life when people had looked at her. Those moments had been looking through. This was different. This was being seen. She thought about saying something gracious, something that acknowledged the complexity of the moment, that thanked people for their patience, that smoothed the edges. Instead, she said to Lady Sophronia directly, "I did not ask for this evening. I came here to hold a shawl. I will not apologize for what happened after that." Lady Sophronia stared at her. Evelyn looked back, and she did not drop her eyes. Someone in the back of the room, she never found out who, began to clap. It was a single pair of hands at first, uncertain, almost accidental. Then a second, then more, spreading unevenly through the room in the way that things spread when people aren't sure they're allowed to feel what they're feeling, but feel it anyway. It was not a standing ovation. It was not triumph. But it was something. Clara Dunmore appeared at her elbow, face red, voice a compressed hiss. "You have absolutely ruined my evening." "I know," Evelyn said. "I'm sorry, Miss Clara." "Sorry doesn't— I know that too." Clara opened her mouth, looked at the Duke of Blackwood standing 3 feet away, and closed it again. Evelyn turned back to Theron. He was watching her with that expression she was beginning to recognize, the one that wasn't quite anything she had a name for yet. Considering. Present. "Tomorrow morning," he said, low enough that only she could hear. "I will send word to wherever you're staying. Will you receive it?" She thought about what tomorrow would look like. The questions from Mrs. Holt, the cold shoulder from Clara. The very real possibility that by morning she would be without a position entirely. "I'll receive it," she said. "Though I'll tell you plainly, I don't know where I'll be receiving it from." "What do you mean?" "I mean that my employment here is likely concluded," she said. "Tonight." He went still. "Where will you go?" "I'll find something." She said it the way she said everything hard. Simply, factually, without asking for pity. "I usually do." Something shifted in his face. Not pity, something more useful than that. Something that looked like decision. "There is a matter I should tell you," he said slowly, like a man choosing each word deliberately. "Before tomorrow. Something I should have said already, in the corridor, before I said anything else." She waited. "My interest tonight is genuine," he said. "I want you to know that plainly and without embellishment. I am not a man who plays games with people who can't afford the cost of them. But I am also not a simple man, and what I would be asking of you, even at its most preliminary, even just in the asking, is not a simple thing. There are reasons why my grandmother has been trying for 3 seasons. There are reasons why I have not said yes to anyone." "What reasons?" He looked at her steadily. "My grandfather left the estate in a condition that has not yet been publicly revealed. There are debts, significant ones. Any woman who attaches herself to this name attaches herself to those as well." The ballroom noise continued around them, but Evelyn heard it from a distance, as though a door had closed between her and the rest of the room. "How significant," she said. "Significant enough that Lady Sophronia's family, if they knew the full extent, would withdraw tonight with considerably less drama." She absorbed that. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you said you were tired of people not telling you true things," he said. "And because I asked you for honesty, and I owe you the same." Evelyn Stone looked at Theron Blackwood in the middle of the Ashworth ballroom, with the noise of a disrupted society evening pressing in on all sides, and she thought, "This is either the most foolish moment of your life or the first honest one." She wasn't sure yet which. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow morning, I'll receive your word." He nodded once. That was all. But it was enough. Across the room, the Dowager Duchess watched the exchange with eyes that had seen 60 years of this family's history and missed very little of it. She turned to the woman beside her, a cousin, distant, who had traveled up from the south for the season, and said, in a voice low enough to carry no further than 2 feet, "She is either going to be the end of him or the making of him." The cousin blinked. "Which do you think?" The Dowager picked up her cup of tea, set it back down, untouched. "I think," she said slowly, "that I have not yet decided which I would prefer." And in the corner of the room, where Evelyn had stood against the wall for 2 hours holding a shawl, 3 coins were still sitting in the pocket of her coat, where she had put them at 7 o'clock when the evening began, when the only thing she'd wanted out of the night was to be invisible. She would not get that wish tonight. She was beginning to think, she might not mind. She was dismissed before the carriages finished leaving the Ashworth Drive. Mrs. Dunmore did not raise her voice. That was the thing about women who had enough power. They never needed to. She simply appeared in the doorway of the guest room where Evelyn had retreated to collect Clara's things, and she stood there with her hands folded and her expression set, and she said, "You'll understand that your services are no longer required." Evelyn set down the ivory fan on the dressing table. "Yes, ma'am. I'll pay through the end of the week. You'll leave tonight." "Tonight." She said it flatly, without inflection. Outside, the last of the guests were still calling their goodbyes in the cold. "It's past 11 o'clock. Mrs. Ashworth has offered the kitchen loft. You may stay there until morning. That is the extent of what I am able to arrange." Evelyn looked at her. She had worked for women like this her entire life. Women who considered themselves reasonable because they delivered unreasonable things in a calm voice. She had learned not to argue with them. It cost too much and changed nothing. "Thank you," she said. And she meant it for the kitchen loft, which was more than she'd sometimes had. Clara appeared behind her mother, and for one moment, just one, her expression flickered into something that wasn't quite guilt, but lived in the same neighborhood. Then her chin went up, and it was gone. "I hope you understand that what you did tonight reflects on all of us." "I held a shawl," Evelyn said. "And then I had a conversation." "You made a spectacle." "I did not make anything, Miss Clara. Things were made around me. There is a difference, though I understand it may not feel like one from where you're standing." Clara's mouth opened. Her mother put a hand on her arm and steered her gently backward, and the door closed, and Evelyn was alone in the room with the ivory fan and the 3 coins still in her coat pocket, and the particular silence of a situation that has finished deciding itself without asking her opinion. She sat down on the edge of the bed, just for a moment, just long enough to press her palms flat against her knees and breathe the way her mother had taught her. Slow, deliberate, through the nose. "You breathe slow when everything is going fast," her mother had said. "It doesn't fix anything, but it keeps you from making the fast things worse." She breathed slow. Then she stood up, collected her small bag from beneath the bed, and went to find the kitchen loft. The morning came gray and cold, the way Virginia mornings did in the deep end of autumn, with frost sitting heavy on the ground and the kind of light that had no warmth in it at all. Evelyn had not slept much. She had lain in the narrow loft cot and stared at the ceiling, and tried to construct something that resembled a plan from the wreckage of the previous evening. What she had: 3 coins, a small bag of clothes, the ability to read Latin, which had proven decorative rather than practical in every working situation she'd encountered. And, apparently, the attention of a duke who had debts he hadn't yet told the county about. What she did not have: a position, a reference that anyone in Richmond society would currently honor, a family, a plan. She was sitting at the kitchen work table with a cup of tea that the Ashworth cook had given her without asking any questions. God bless women who gave you tea without questions. When the knock came at the kitchen door. Not the front door, the kitchen door. She looked at the cook. The cook looked at her. They both looked at the door. It was a young man in Blackwood livery, the kind of livery that even Evelyn, who had spent her life in other people's houses, recognized as expensive. He was holding a folded letter, and he looked deeply uncomfortable about being at the kitchen door, which told her the instruction to use it had come from someone who understood what it would mean to knock at the front. "Miss Stone?" he said. "Yes." He held out the letter. She took it. He waited. She unfolded it. The handwriting was precise and angular, and used no more words than it needed to, which she was already learning was characteristic. Miss Stone, I am told you are currently without a position. I am sending this to the kitchen entrance deliberately, so that no one in the household need know the correspondence occurred, if you would prefer it that way. I will call at 10 o'clock if you are willing to receive me. If not, say the word to the bearer, and I will not trouble you further. T.B. She read it twice. Then she looked up at the young man in the livery. Tell him 10 o'clock is agreeable. The cook refilled her tea without being asked, and said absolutely nothing, which was, in Evelyn's experience, one of the finest things a person could do for another person. He arrived at 5 minutes to 10, which told her punctuality was a value rather than a performance. He came to the front door this time. There was no avoiding it. And by the time the Ashworth butler had brought her word, the household had gone very still in the particular way that meant everyone was paying attention and pretending not to. They sat in the small receiving room that Mrs. Ashworth had offered, which was neutral ground and had the advantage of a closed door. A maid sat near the window with her mending, because propriety required it, and she kept her eyes very firmly on the mending, which Evelyn appreciated. Theron Blackwood sat across from her and looked exactly as he had looked the night before. Controlled, direct, showing nothing he had not decided to show. But he had come. That was the thing she kept returning to. He had come to the kitchen entrance of an unfamiliar house at 10 in the morning for a woman he had known for less than 12 hours. You were dismissed, he said without preamble. I was. Last night. Before the carriages had finished leaving, she confirmed. Something moved in his jaw. I'm sorry. Don't be. I expected it. Expectation doesn't make it less wrong. No, she agreed. It doesn't. She folded her hands. You said you wanted to continue a conversation. I assume that's still the purpose of this visit? In part. He reached into his coat and produced a folded document, which he set on the table between them. I spoke to my solicitor this morning. She looked at the document without touching it. Before 10 o'clock. Before 7, he said. I had some things to arrange. She looked at him. The document is an offer of a formal position, he said carefully, as though he had rehearsed the phrasing. Within my household, as a librarian. I have a substantial library and no one currently managing it. The salary is, he named a figure that made her go very still. Quarterly, with full board and appropriate accommodations. She stared at the document. A librarian. You know Latin, he said. My library has several hundred volumes that haven't been properly catalogued in 20 years. The position is real and necessary, regardless of any other consideration. You are offering me employment, she said slowly. I am offering you a legitimate position that does not compromise you and does not leave you without options. He held her gaze. If, after a month, you decide the situation is not what you want, you leave with a reference and a quarter's salary. No obligation, no pressure. The position exists on its own terms. Evelyn sat back very slightly in her chair. She was thinking about the word regardless. He had used it deliberately, regardless of any other consideration. This is very carefully constructed, she said. I'm a careful man. Or you're a man who found an elegant solution to the problem of how to offer a woman he's known for 11 hours something that doesn't sound like what it is. He was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you think it is? I think it is a man making sure a woman has a door to walk through, she said, without forcing her to decide tonight what's on the other side of it. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, more like the acknowledgement of something he'd known and wanted confirmed. "Yes," he said simply. "That is exactly what it is." She looked at the document again, thought about 3 coins, thought about the kitchen loft ceiling she'd stared at until 4 in the morning, thought about 7 positions in 12 years and 4 dismissals and the particular exhaustion of a life built entirely out of surviving. She thought about a man who had come to the kitchen door on purpose. "I'll need to think about it," she said. "Of course. Not because I'm uncertain," she said, "but because I make decisions carefully. That's—" She paused. "That is the only asset I have reliably maintained." "I understand," he said. And the thing was, he seemed to. He didn't rush. He didn't push. He just sat there with the patience of a man who had decided something and was giving the decision room to land. She almost said yes right then, just because of that. She stopped herself. They talked for another hour. Not about the document, not about the position, not about the previous evening. About other things. The way 2 people talk when they are actually trying to learn something about each other, rather than perform for an audience. He told her about the estate, about the years he'd spent managing land that his grandfather had systematically leveraged into debt while presenting a face of prosperity to the county. She told him about the Caldwell Library, about the 8 months of stolen Latin, about the particular freedom of reading a dead language in the dark with the smell of kitchen fire. He laughed once. Just briefly, just once. It surprised both of them. "What?" she said. "You described the Aeneid as overlong but sincere. I have never in my life heard it described that way." "Have you read it?" "3 times, at school, under considerable duress." "And?" "Overlong," he admitted, "but sincere." It was the first easy moment they'd had. It lasted about 30 seconds before the door opened. The maid looked up from her mending with an expression of genuine alarm as the Dowager Duchess of Blackwood stepped into the room without knocking, without announcing herself, and without any apparent awareness that entering an occupied receiving room unannounced was anything other than her natural right. She looked at Theron. She looked at Evelyn. She looked at the document on the table between them. "I see," she said. "Grandmother." His voice had that particular quality again, the not louder, not harder, just deeper quality. "I did not invite you." "No." She sat down in the chair near the window. The maid scooted sideways without being asked. And she settled herself with the arrangement of a woman who intended to stay. "But I am here regardless. I came with Mrs. Ashworth's blessing, before you ask. We are old friends." Evelyn had a feeling that the Dowager Duchess had a great many old friends positioned conveniently throughout the county. "I have been thinking," the old woman said, and she addressed herself to Evelyn with the same directness she had used the night before. Uncomfortable, but at least consistent. "About what you said, that you have survived every world you have been placed in." "I said that, ma'am. I've been considering whether it is a quality or a warning." She paused. "I have also been considering the situation as it currently presents itself. And I find I have questions that my grandson has not seen fit to address." "Ask them," Theron said flatly. "I'm asking the girl." She looked at Evelyn. "Do you have feelings for my grandson?" Evelyn kept her expression still. "I have known your grandson for less than 12 hours. "That is not an answer." "It is the most accurate one I have," Evelyn said. "I find him," she chose the word deliberately, "genuine, in a way I did not expect. Whether that is feeling or simply relief at finding something real, I cannot yet tell you." The Dowager studied her. "Are you hoping for a match? For the title?" Ma'am, last night I was hoping for no one to spill wine on Miss Clara's shawl. My ambitions have historically been proportional to my circumstances. The dowager's mouth did something complicated. Not quite a smile. Not quite not one either. My grandson tells me there is a library position. He has offered one, yes. And you haven't taken it? Not yet. Why not? Evelyn looked at the dowager directly. Because I want to be sure I'm accepting it for the right reasons. A position that comes with complications I cannot fully see from where I'm standing is not automatically better than a position with no complications that I understand completely. You are cautious. I am practical. The two are not the same thing. No, Evelyn agreed. They're not. But they look similar from a distance. The dowager was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her own coat, a gesture that mirrored her grandson's so exactly that Evelyn nearly remarked on it, and produced a small envelope, which she set on the table beside Theron's document. Before either of you proceeds any further, she said, there is something you should know. Both of you. She looked at her grandson. I had inquiries made as well, last night after the ball, into the Hartwell matter. Theron went very still. And, he said, and what Lady Sophronia implied last night was not invented. The dowager's voice was measured, careful. There is a letter, written by the Hartwell eldest son, delivered to 2 families in Richmond, which contains specific accusations about Miss Stone's conduct during her time in their household. The room went cold. Evelyn felt it. The specific cold of something she had feared was moving toward her and had finally arrived. The letter is a lie, she said. Her voice was steady. She made it steady because it was the only thing she could fully control at that moment. I believe you, the dowager said. Evelyn blinked. I have met Arthur Hartwell, the old woman continued, with a particular tone of someone describing something distasteful. He is exactly the kind of man who would write exactly that kind of letter. His credibility, to anyone who knows him personally, is negligible. She paused. To those who do not know him personally, however, the letter exists. And letters that exist have a way of traveling. How far has it traveled? Theron asked. 3 families as of this morning, possibly more by evening. The dowager looked at her hands. Sophronia's cousin sent it out, before the ball, which means it was prepared in advance. This was not a spontaneous response to last night. It was a preparation. Someone told her you might make an unusual choice. Evelyn and Theron looked at each other. Someone was watching, he said slowly. Someone has been watching for longer than last night, the dowager said. There are people who prefer to see this family fail. Who would benefit from the estate remaining in debt, from no match being made, from things continuing as they have been? She paused. I have not been forthcoming with you, Theron, about the extent of those people's efforts. How long? He said, and there was something new in his voice. Not quite hurt, but the shape of it. Since your grandfather died, she said. There are creditors who hold notes on Blackwood land. Who would rather hold them indefinitely than see them resolved? A successful match, particularly to a woman with no family connections they could leverage, would complicate their position considerably. The silence stretched. Evelyn understood it before he did, because she had spent her life understanding the mechanics of people who used information as currency. The ladies, she said. The 10 ladies last season, the season before, were any of them connected to these creditors? The dowager looked at her for a long moment. 3 of them, she said quietly. Theron made a sound that was not a word. Lady Sophronia's father, the dowager continued, holds a substantial note on the North Field. A marriage to Sophronia would have given him legal grounds to call that note due immediately as a family transaction. I should have told you. I did not because... She stopped. I believed I could manage it. I was wrong. You were protecting me, he said. His voice was very careful. I was protecting the estate, she corrected. They are not always the same thing, and I did not always choose correctly between them. She looked at her hands. I am telling you now because this girl, she looked at Evelyn, has done nothing to deserve what is coming her way if you proceed, without understanding why it is coming. Evelyn sat very still. She was running the numbers in her mind. Not financial numbers, but the other kind. The arithmetic of her situation. A letter in circulation. 3 families already, more by evening. A position being offered by the subject of a scandal she was now attached to. No reference, no family, and a set of people who had been working systematically against this family for years, who now had a specific and convenient target. Her. What do you want me to do? She asked the Dowager directly. You came here with this information for a reason. What is it? The old woman looked at her with something that had shifted from the previous night. Less cold, more complicated. I want you to understand the field before you step onto it, she said. I have spent 60 years in this society doing things by the rules, and I am here to tell you the rules are designed to crush women who have no cushion. If you take that position, she nodded at the document, you will be crushed by them. Unless, she stopped. Unless what? Theron said. Unless she is not merely a librarian. The Dowager set her teacup down with a precision that felt like punctuation. The letter loses most of its power the moment the situation changes significantly enough that the gossip is replaced by something bigger. A librarian attached to scandal is a ruined woman. A woman formerly introduced as something else is a different story entirely. The room was so quiet that Evelyn could hear the maid's needle moving through fabric. Theron looked at his grandmother. You're suggesting... I am suggesting, the Dowager said firmly, that I have spent 3 seasons trying to protect you from yourself and from this situation, and I have done it poorly. And I am now looking at this woman. Her eyes went to Evelyn, and for the first time there was something in them that was not calculation, not assessment, but something approaching recognition. And I am thinking that she is possibly the only person who has sat in a room with me and my grandson and told us both the truth. And I find that I am not interested in watching that be destroyed by Arthur Hartwell's letter and Sophronia's cousin's spite. That's not an answer, Evelyn said. What are you suggesting, specifically? The Dowager Duchess of Blackwood looked at Evelyn Stone, the woman with 3 coins and no family, and 4 dismissals and stolen Latin, and said, clearly and without flinching, I am suggesting that my grandson court you properly, formally, publicly, starting today, before that letter reaches another house. The word fell into the center of the room and stayed there. Evelyn didn't move. Theron turned to look at her, and she could see him measuring something. Her reaction, her steadiness, something he was trying to read and couldn't quite. Well, Evelyn said, after a long moment. Her voice was very level. That is considerably more than a library. Yes, the Dowager said. It is. And you believe this would stop the letter from doing damage? I believe it changes the story, the old woman said. You are not a scandal if you are the Duke's chosen interest. You are the next chapter. And people follow chapters. They don't chase back to read the footnotes. Evelyn looked at the document on the table, then at the small envelope, then at the window where the November light was coming in cold and flat and entirely indifferent to any of this. Then she looked at Theron Blackwood. He had not said a word since his grandmother's suggestion. He was watching Evelyn with the same focused, unreadable attention he'd given her the night before at the east wall, and she had the distinct feeling that he was doing what he had done then, waiting, giving the decision room. "This is entirely unfair," she said. "Yes," he said. "You know that." "I do." "You are asking me to make a decision of enormous consequence in the space of—" "I'm not asking anything," he said. "My grandmother is making a suggestion. I am waiting for you to tell me what you want." "What I want," she said, "is irrelevant to the actual situation." "On the contrary," he said, "it is the only thing I'm interested in." She looked at him for a long time. Then she picked up the document from the table, the library position, the carefully constructed door, and she folded it in half and held it in her hands. "I'll take the position," she said, "the library position. That part is straightforward, and I can make that decision clearly." She looked at the dowager. "The rest of it," she paused. "The rest of it I will think about. Today. And I will give you an answer by evening." The Dowager Duchess nodded once. Something in her shoulders shifted. Not quite relief, but its quieter cousin. Theron said nothing. But when he reached out and moved the small envelope, the one containing the Hartwell letter, to her side of the table, he did it carefully, like he was making sure she had the thing that belonged to her. "You should read it," he said, "so you know exactly what you're dealing with." She looked at the envelope. She thought about the word regardless. Then she picked it up and she opened it, and she read every word that Arthur Hartwell had put into writing about her. Every lie, arranged in the careful grammar of a man who had spent his life not being held responsible for anything. And she read it with her spine straight and her breathing slow and her hands entirely steady. She set it back down when she was done. "All right," she said quietly. That was all. Just those 2 words. But the way she said them meant something that 2 words alone shouldn't have been able to carry. Something that had to do with deciding not to be afraid of a fight you didn't pick, because the alternative was letting someone else decide what your life meant. The dowager watched her. Theron watched her. The maid near the window had long since stopped pretending to sew, and Evelyn Stone sat at the table in the gray November morning with a fabricated letter in one hand and a library position in the other, and understood, with a particular clarity that comes from having no more room to back up, that everything from this moment forward was going to require her to be exactly as strong as she had always privately believed she was. She had just never had occasion to find out if that belief was true. Today, she was going to find out. By noon, the letter had reached 2 more families. Evelyn knew because Theron told her, and he told her because he had people who told him things, a network of information she was only beginning to understand the shape of. He sent word to the Ashworth house at 11:30, a brief note that said simply, "2 more. Hartwell's cousin is involved. I am dealing with it. Hold your answer until we speak again." She read the note in the kitchen with the cook's tea going cold beside her and thought, "This is what it means to be adjacent to power. Information arrives. Things move. You are either inside the movement or you are crushed by it." She had spent her entire life outside the movement. She was not sure she knew how to be inside it. But she was beginning to think she was going to learn. He came back at 1 o'clock. This time he did not send the young man in livery ahead of him. He simply arrived, and the Ashworth butler, who had been watching the morning's proceedings with the careful neutrality of a man employed by someone who entertained dowager duchesses, showed him to the same receiving room without being asked. Evelyn was already there. "Tell me," she said, before he had fully sat down. He told her. Concisely, without softening it. The Hartwell letter had been copied, 3 copies, not 1, and distributed through a deliberate circuit of households whose mistresses were known to be in regular correspondence with one another. By evening, he estimated, it would have reached every family of consequence within 20 miles. By the following week, further. "It was coordinated," she said. "Yes. Before the ball." The copies were made before the ball. The distribution was triggered by what happened last night. He paused. Someone was watching to see if I would make an unusual choice, and had prepared for the possibility. "Sophronia's people." "Her father's people," he corrected. "Sophronia is a tool being used. I don't think she knows the full extent of it." Evelyn sat with that for a moment. It didn't make her feel better about Sophronia, but it arranged things more accurately. "What are you going to do?" "I have already done several things," he said. "My solicitor is preparing a formal response to the letter that documents the inconsistencies in Hartwell's account and the timeline that contradicts his claims. That addresses the legal dimension." He looked at her steadily. "The social dimension is more complicated." "The social dimension requires me," she said. "It requires a decision from you," he said. "Yes." She had been thinking about this since the Dowager left. She had been thinking about it with the same systematic attention she had given to every difficult situation in her life. Not emotionally, or not only emotionally, but practically. Mapping the terrain, identifying what was known and what was not. What she knew. The letter was a weapon aimed at her specifically because she was vulnerable. No family to defend her name. No connections to leverage. No money to hire people who solved problems with money. She was a clean target. What she also knew, the only thing that changed the calculation was the one thing she had never had and had never expected to have. Association. Proximity to something large enough that the weapon looked small by comparison. What she did not know, what she genuinely could not calculate, was whether the man sitting across from her was what he appeared to be. She had met men who performed decency. She had worked for them. She knew the architecture of the performance by now, the careful words, the reasonable tone, the way they made you feel heard right up until the moment it cost them something. She looked at him. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to answer it without managing me." "All right." "Why me?" She held his gaze. "Truthfully, not the answer you gave in the corridor last night. That was true as far as it went, but it didn't go all the way. You could have left me at the east wall. You saw something, and you could have let it stay unseen. Why didn't you?" He was quiet for long enough that she knew he was actually thinking about it, rather than reaching for the nearest sufficient answer. "Because you were the only person in that room," he said finally, "who was not performing." "Everyone performs." "Yes, but you were performing competence instead of appeal." He paused. "Every woman in that room was arranged to be wanted. You were arranged to be useful. And I watched you for," he paused again, "longer than you probably realized. Before I walked over. Because I couldn't identify what I was seeing, and I am not accustomed to things I cannot identify." "And what did you decide you were seeing?" "Someone who had made a complete peace," he said slowly, "with not being chosen. Who had stopped waiting for it. Who was," he searched for the word, "free of wanting it in a way that made everyone who was wanting it look slightly desperate by comparison." She absorbed that. "That is a very particular thing to notice." "I am a very particular man. And it made you want to choose me. It made me want to know you," he said. "The choosing is a separate question, and a larger one, and I have not answered it, even to myself. But knowing you," he looked at her directly, "yes, that I wanted immediately." She let that sit between them for a moment without touching it. Then she said, "If I agree to what your grandmother suggested, to be informally courted, I need you to understand what you are agreeing to in return. Tell me." "I will not be managed," she said. "Not by you, not by your grandmother, not by the situation. If I am going to stand in this, whatever this is, I will stand in it as myself, not as a version of myself that has been adjusted to fit what the county expects. I would not want the adjusted version." "People say that," she said carefully, "before they understand what the unadjusted version actually costs them in rooms full of people they need to maintain relationships with." He looked at her without flinching. "I understand that risk." "Do you?" "Miss Stone." His voice was very quiet and very certain. "I have been refusing to be managed by rooms full of people for 3 seasons. I am familiar with the cost." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she made her decision, not dramatically, not with a grand gesture or a speech. She just made it, the way you make the hard decisions, which is by recognizing that the alternative is worse and accepting that. "All right," she said. "Tell me what formally courted looks like, in practical terms, what it requires." He told her. It required a public appearance together within 48 hours. Something visible, deliberate, documented in the way that social appearances were documented, which meant witnessed by the right people who would speak of it to other right people. It required a formal introduction to the county under his name as a woman under his consideration. It required, above everything else, that she not appear to be what she was, defensive, reactive, pushed into a corner by a letter. "I need to appear to have chosen this," she said, "not been rescued by it." "Yes. That is a meaningful distinction." "It is the only distinction that matters," he said. "A woman rescued by a duke is a story people pity and eventually forget. A woman who looked at a duke and made a clear-eyed choice is a story people respect." She thought about that. "You've considered this more than I expected." "I've had more time to consider it," he said. "I spent last night thinking. I imagine you spent it in a kitchen loft." She almost laughed. Not quite, but almost. "Yes, I did." "Then you have my apologies for the inequity of preparation time." "Apology accepted." She straightened. "The appearance within 48 hours. Where?" "The Calloway dinner," he said. "Thursday evening. It has been planned for a month. Half the county will be there." She felt the weight of that land. Half the county. Yes. Including Sophronia's family. Almost certainly. "And the Hartwells?" A pause. "The Hartwells were not invited. However," he stopped. "However," she repeated. "Arthur Hartwell has a cousin who is engaged to the Calloway eldest daughter," he said. "He will be present as a family guest." She sat very still. "You want me to walk into a dinner party where the man who wrote a letter of deliberate false accusation about me will be in the room?" "I want nothing," he said firmly. "I am telling you the terrain. What you do with that information is entirely—" "I'll be there," she said. He stopped. "Thursday," she said. "I'll be there, and I'll be—" She paused, choosing the word with the same precision she used for everything. "Unmanageable." Something happened in his expression, something she hadn't seen before. A warmth that wasn't performed, that came from somewhere real, that he had not entirely managed to keep contained behind the control. It lasted only a second, but she saw it. "Right," he said. "Thursday." She was given a room at Blackwood Hall that afternoon. The Dowager arranged it with the same decisive efficiency she apparently brought to all things. A guest room in the east wing, appropriate chaperone in an adjacent room, full household access for the purposes of beginning her role as librarian. It was done before Evelyn had finished processing the speed at which it was done. She stood in the center of the room with her small bag, and she looked at the space. The high ceiling, the proper bed, the window that faced something other than a kitchen yard. And she breathed slow, through the nose, the way her mother had taught her. Then she unpacked her 3 things, arranged them on the dresser, and went to find the library. It was enormous. She stood in the doorway, and for a moment she forgot everything. The letter, the dinner, the whole complicated structure of the situation she had walked into. And she just looked at the books. Floor to ceiling on 3 walls. Some organized, most not. A complete lack of catalog system that was either the result of profound disorganization or someone who had known where everything was and had died with that knowledge. Dust on some shelves. Candle wax in the reading table that had not been cleaned in what looked like years. She put her hand on the nearest spine and felt something ease in her chest. This part, at least, she knew how to do. She worked until supper, not thinking about Thursday, not thinking about the letter, or Sophronia's father and his notes on the North Field, or Arthur Hartwell and his cousin and the dinner party. She moved through the shelves with the systematic attention she had once given to a different library in a different house, and she was so entirely absorbed in it that she didn't hear the door open. "You've been in here for 4 hours." She turned. Theron stood in the doorway, and he looked different here. In his own house. Not smaller exactly, but less armored. The coat was off. He was in shirt sleeves, which she registered and then catalogued as none of her particular business. "The south wall alone is going to take a week," she said. "Someone has shelved the theology with the agriculture. I cannot determine whether this is a philosophical statement or an accident." He crossed to the south wall and examined it. "My grandfather," he said. "He believed organized systems were a form of intellectual cowardice." "Your grandfather sounds like a man who was difficult to live with." "He was impossible to live with," Theron said, without emotion. "He was also brilliant and entirely amoral about money, which is a specific combination that tends to produce both remarkable libraries and significant debt." She had found 3 first editions already. She did not mention them yet. They needed to be verified before she raised expectations. "You should eat something," he said. "I'll eat when I reach a stopping point." "You've been at a stopping point for 3 hours. You keep starting again." She looked at him. "Have you been monitoring my stopping points?" "I walked past the door twice," he said. "Once at 4 o'clock and once at 6. Both times you were in the same position relative to the south wall and showed no signs of stopping." She turned back to the shelf she was working on. "The library is a better distraction than thinking about Thursday." "Yes," he said. "I expect it is." Silence for a moment. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that 2 people fall into when they have already said the hard things, and there is a pause before the next hard things arrive. "I spoke to my solicitor again this afternoon," he said, "about the Hartwell letter." She kept her hands on the books. "And?" "There is a witness," he said. "We found one. A housemaid who was in the Hartwell house during the period in question. She has agreed to provide a signed statement about the actual nature of the events." Evelyn went still. She turned slowly. "Who found her?" "My solicitor's office began the inquiry this morning, immediately after I left the Ashworth house. They located her by mid-afternoon." He paused. "She had been dismissed from the Hartwell house 6 months after you were, for similar reasons." The air went out of the room. "He does this regularly," Evelyn said. Her voice was very quiet. "It appears so." His jaw was tight. The The statement she provided describes a pattern that the letter misrepresents considerably. Will she make the statement publicly? She is willing to sign it before a magistrate. Whether it becomes public depends on whether the Hartwells choose to pursue the matter through legal channels, which my solicitor believes they will not, given the statement's content. He looked at her steadily. But it exists, signed and witnessed, and the people who received the letter will be informed of its existence. Evelyn pressed her palm flat against the spine of the nearest book and breathed slow. She was not going to cry. She was absolutely not going to cry in the library of a man she had known for less than 24 hours, over a letter she had told herself for months she didn't care about. "Miss Stone." "I'm fine," she said. "I know you are," he said. "I'm not suggesting otherwise." "Then why did you say my name?" "Because you were somewhere in your own head, and I thought you might want to come back." She looked at him. He was standing 6 feet away, with his hands in his pockets, and his expression doing the thing it did. The almost but not quite of a man who felt things precisely, but had learned at some point that feeling them loudly was not available to him. "That woman," Evelyn said. "The housemaid. Someone should—" "My solicitor has already discussed a settlement on her behalf," he said. She was not dismissed with a reference either. Evelyn nodded once, turned back to the shelf, straightened a book that didn't need straightening. "Thank you," she said. "You don't need to." "I know I don't need to," she said. "I'm saying it because I mean it, not because I owe it." Another silence. "Come and eat something," he said. "The south wall will be here tomorrow." She put the book back, smoothed her hands on her skirt. "Yes, all right." They walked down the corridor toward the dining room, and she was acutely aware of the strangeness of it. Walking through this house that was not hers, beside this man she was still figuring out, in a situation she had not chosen but had now committed to as though she had. The house was very quiet in the evenings, she was learning. Larger than it needed to be for one man and one old woman, and a staff that kept itself mostly invisible. "Does it bother you?" she asked. "The size of it?" He considered. "It bothered me when I first inherited it. I had been at the estate for the war years, and then the work after. And when I came back to the hall itself, I kept thinking that a house this large had no business being this quiet." He paused. "I've made my peace with it." "Or you've made your peace with being alone in it." He glanced at her sideways. "Are those different things?" "Sometimes," she said. "Yes." He said nothing to that. But he thought about it. She could see him thinking about it. They ate dinner with the Dowager present, which meant the meal was not simple. The Dowager had opinions about the Thursday dinner that she had apparently been organizing in her mind since mid-afternoon, and she delivered them across the soup course with the systematic precision of a general reviewing tactical positions. "You will need something appropriate to wear," she said to Evelyn. "What you have," a glance that was not cruel but was honest, "will not serve for the Calloway dinner." "I'm aware of that," Evelyn said. "I'll arrange it," the Dowager said. "My dressmaker is efficient when she needs to be." "I'd prefer to be consulted about what is arranged," Evelyn said carefully. The Dowager paused. "Consulted?" "About my own clothing, ma'am, yes. I'd like to be part of that conversation." The old woman looked at her for a moment with that expression Evelyn was beginning to recognize. The one that was calculating, but had something else underneath it. Something that might have been satisfaction if you caught it from the right angle. "Very well," she said. "The dressmaker comes at 9. I'll be there." "You will also need to be prepared for what the evening will bring," the Dowager continued. "Sophronia's family will conduct themselves with surface civility and subsurface damage. They are skilled at it. The goal for Thursday is simple. You do not react. Whatever is said, whatever is implied, whatever small cruelty is delivered with a smile. You do not react. You are a woman who chose this. Women who chose things don't need to defend the choice. Evelyn looked at her across the table. You've done this before. I have navigated every version of this situation for 60 years, the old woman said. I know exactly how it works, and I know exactly where it hurts the most. She set down her soup spoon. I am telling you where to armor yourself. I appreciate that, ma'am. Don't appreciate it, the dowager said. Use it. Thursday came faster than any day had a right to. Evelyn spent Wednesday in the library, cataloging and thinking in the particular combination she had always found most productive. She thought about what she was walking into, and she thought about Arthur Hartwell's cousin, and she thought about the statement from the housemaid that now existed, signed and witnessed, in a solicitor's office in Richmond. She thought about the dowager's words. Women who chose things don't need to defend the choice. She had chosen things her entire life, chosen to read, chosen to correct the account, chosen to decline what should never have been offered, chosen to say, all right, in a corridor with her heart hammering and her hands deliberately still. Thursday evening arrived. She wore deep blue. The dressmaker had been efficient, and the dowager had been, in her particular way, thoughtful. The color was not elaborate, not ornamental, not trying to make a statement through decoration. It was simply correct. The kind of correct that said, I know what I am. Theron met her at the foot of the stairs. He looked at her with that focused attention she was getting used to and said, simply, Ready? No, she said honestly, but that's never stopped me before. Something moved in his expression. He offered his arm. She placed her hand on it. The carriage ride to the Calloway house took 20 minutes, and they spent it mostly in silence, which was not the uncomfortable kind. He told her once, Whatever happens in there, you are not alone in it. She nodded and said nothing, because there was nothing she needed to add. They arrived. The Calloway house was lit from every window, the sound of a full dinner party already well underway even from outside. Evelyn could hear voices, laughter, the dense particular sound of a large gathering in an enclosed space. She breathed slow, through the nose. The doors opened, and from across the entry hall, through the gaps between people, she saw him, before she was ready. Arthur Hartwell's cousin, Frederick, standing near the fireplace. He saw her at the same moment. His face did something complicated and unpleasant. And beside him, just visible over the shoulder of the woman he was speaking to, she saw someone she had not anticipated. Arthur Hartwell himself, not invited. Standing in the Calloway entry hall, 3 feet from his cousin, with an expression that told her in a single glance that his being here was not accidental and was not recent and had been arranged specifically for tonight. She felt Theron go still beside her. He's here, she said quietly. I see him, he said. His voice had that quality again, the deep, final, not louder quality. He wasn't on the guest list. No, Theron said. He was not. Evelyn looked at Arthur Hartwell across the room. He was exactly as she had last seen him. Prosperous, self-assured, wearing the expression of a man who had decided in advance how this evening was going to go. She thought about the housemaid's signed statement. She thought about 3 coins, and a kitchen loft, and a wall she had spent 2 hours standing against. She thought about women who chose things. Then she squared her shoulders, kept her hand exactly where it was on Theron Blackwood's arm, and walked forward into the room. Arthur Hartwell did not move when she walked in. That was the first thing she noticed, that he had positioned himself deliberately, near enough to the entry that he would be impossible to miss, far enough that approaching him would require intention. He had staged himself. He had thought about this. She kept walking. Theron's arm was steady under her hand. She could feel the tension in it. Not fear, nothing like fear, but the particular quality of a man who has made a decision and is holding it with both hands while he waits for the moment to use it. She had been learning to read him in small ways over the past 2 days, and what she read now was controlled, deliberate, and considerably more angry than he was showing. The room received them the way rooms receive things that disrupt their expected order, with a ripple. Conversations paused. Eyes moved. The particular social current of a Virginia dinner party in the year of 1817 shifted its direction and aimed itself at the door. Mrs. Calloway came forward to greet them, with the practiced grace of a woman who had been hosting gatherings for 30 years and could manage almost anything with a smile. Almost. "Your Grace," she looked at Evelyn once, briefly, thoroughly, and then back to Theron with an expression that was doing a great deal of complicated work. "And Miss Stone, is it? We're so pleased." "Thank you for having us," Evelyn said. Her voice was even. She made it even. They moved into the room. Evelyn was aware of Frederick Hartwell tracking their movement from the fireplace. She was aware of Sophronia's mother, positioned near the window, fan moving in short, controlled strokes. She was aware of Arthur Hartwell, still not moving, watching her with the expression of a man who believes himself to hold something. She turned toward the nearest cluster of guests and let Theron make introductions. The first 15 minutes were careful. Everyone was careful. The county's social machinery ran on careful, on the precise navigation of what could and could not be said in which combinations of people, and every person in that room was currently calculating the new variables that her presence represented. She watched them calculate. She smiled where smiling was required and said nothing that was not considered. Then Sophronia's mother crossed the room. She was a tall woman, constructed on the same lines as her daughter. Everything arranged, everything deliberate, nothing accidental. She stopped in front of Evelyn with a smile that had the temperature of February. "Miss Stone," she said, "I understand you've taken a position at Blackwood Hall." "I have," Evelyn said. "I'm cataloging the library." "How very practical." The pause before practical was 3 beats too long. "The library is remarkable," Evelyn said, as though the pause had not happened. "Several hundred volumes, many of them uncatalogued. It will take some months to do it properly." "I'm sure." The woman tilted her head slightly. "You'll find the household adjusting, I expect, to the new arrangement." "The household has been very welcoming," Evelyn said. Sophronia's mother smiled with half her mouth. "And the Dowager Duchess? She is welcoming as well?" "She has been generous with her guidance," Evelyn said. "I find her very direct. I appreciate directness." The woman looked at her for a moment with an expression that was recalculating. Then she said, lower, meant to carry no further than between them, "You seem like an intelligent young woman, Miss Stone. I say this sincerely. Intelligent women understand when a situation is beyond their management." "Intelligent women," Evelyn said, equally low, equally measured, "also understand the difference between a situation that is beyond their management and a situation that someone else wants them to believe is." Sophronia's mother went very still. "Enjoy the evening, ma'am," Evelyn said, and turned back to the conversation happening beside her, as though the exchange had been entirely pleasant. Theron had heard it. He said nothing, but something in the set of his jaw told her he had heard every word. It was Frederick Hartwell who moved first. He crossed the room with the particular confidence of a man who believes he has the advantage, which, Evelyn supposed, he thought he did. He stopped 2 feet away and addressed himself to Theron with the studied casualness of someone who had rehearsed the casualness. Blackwood, good to see you." His eyes went to Evelyn. "And Miss Stone, I hadn't expected to see you this evening." "I imagine not," she said pleasantly. "My cousin speaks very highly of your time with his family." He let the sentence end there, in the particular place that let it mean things he hadn't said. Theron spoke before Evelyn could. "I've had occasion to discuss that period with my solicitor," he said. Conversational. Easy. "Interesting documentation, the things that turn up when you look properly." Frederick's smile thinned. "I'm not sure I follow." "Signed statements," Theron said. "Witnessed. The kind that become rather public if the need arises." He held the man's gaze with the same steady attention he gave everything. "I trust there won't be a need." Frederick looked between them. The confidence was doing something more complicated now. "Statements from whom?" "From someone your cousin dismissed 6 months after Miss Stone," Theron said, "for similar reasons." He paused. "I'd encourage you to pass that information to Arthur at your earliest convenience." Frederick Hartwell said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then he excused himself and walked back across the room, and Evelyn watched him reach Arthur and bend his head and speak quickly. And she watched Arthur's expression change, not collapse, not crumble. Change. The certainty going out of it like air from a bellows. She looked away. Her hands were steady. She was proud of that. "You didn't need to do that right now," she said quietly to Theron. "No," he agreed, but he was going to keep doing it all evening. Better to remove the weapon before the dinner course. "That's very practical." "I am a practical man." She looked at him sideways. "You said you were a careful man 2 days ago." "I contain multitudes," he said. She almost laughed. Again, this was becoming a pattern. Dinner was served at 8. She was seated beside a man named Colonel Whitmore, who was 65 and had known the Blackwood family for 40 years, and who spent the first course studying her with the frank, open curiosity of someone too old to bother with pretense. He reminded her of the old Mr. Caldwell, which made her immediately more comfortable. "Well," he said after the soup, "you're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Somebody who looked more distressed," he said, "given the circumstances." "What circumstances specifically?" she asked, with genuine curiosity. She wanted to know what version of the story had reached him. "Letter business," he said, waving a hand. "The Hartwell boy. I've known that family for years. Known Arthur since he was 12. He shook his head. "He was a liar at 12. Hasn't improved." She blinked. "You believe the letter is false?" "I believe Arthur Hartwell has written false things about people before," he said. "More than once. I believe a man of that particular character does not change his character because it has become inconvenient for others." He picked up his fork. "I said as much to the Carrington family this morning when they asked my opinion." "The Carrington family," she said carefully. "They received a copy." "They did. I told them what I've just told you." He looked at her steadily. "There are people in this county, Miss Stone, who have been watching Blackwood struggle with his grandmother's project for 3 seasons and feeling sorry for the man. He's not easy, Blackwood. But he is honest, which is rarer and more valuable." He paused. "A woman who could match that honesty would have more support than you might expect." She sat with that for a moment. "That's more generous than the evening has given me reason to expect." "The evening is young," he said, without illusions. "But so is the situation. And situations change." The main course came, and with it came Arthur Hartwell. He crossed the dining room toward her end of the table with the purposeful movement of a man who had decided the evening had nothing left to cost him. He stopped behind the chair opposite her, the chair of a guest who had stepped away, and he looked at her across the table with the expression of someone who has been preparing something for a long time. "Miss Stone," he said, "I think we're overdue for an honest conversation." The table went quiet in that particular graduated way. First the people closest, then the next ring, then further, until the far end was the only place conversation still continued, and that only for a moment longer. Evelyn set her fork down. "Mr. Hartwell," she said, "you're standing at someone else's chair. I'd like to speak with you. You're speaking with me now. Please say what you have to say." He looked thrown by that, by the fact that she hadn't stood, hadn't lowered her voice, hadn't given him the private moment he'd wanted. He recovered quickly. "The letter I sent was false," she said. Clear, flat, no softening on any edge. A breath moved through the table. Arthur's jaw tightened. "My account of the events was false," she said again, with the same precision. "I know what happened in your family's house. You know what happened. There is at least one other person still living who knows what happened. You wrote a letter that said something different, and you distributed it to people you believed would never compare it against another account." She held his gaze. "You were wrong about that." "You cannot!" "There is a signed statement," Theron said from 3 seats away. He hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. "In my solicitor's office in Richmond, witnessed before a magistrate, describing the events of the relevant period with specificity and detail." He looked at Arthur Hartwell across the candlelit table. "If you'd like to continue this conversation, I'd encourage you to consider that document carefully before you do." Arthur Hartwell stood at the empty chair and looked at Evelyn, and looked at Theron, and looked at the table full of people watching him. And something collapsed behind his eyes. Not remorse. Nothing as clean as that. Just the practical recognition of a man who has played a card and found the other hand better. Colonel Whitmore said, from his seat beside Evelyn, without any particular drama, "Sit down, Arthur, or leave the room. But standing there is doing you no credit." Arthur Hartwell left the room. The table exhaled. Evelyn picked up her fork. Her hand was steady. Completely, entirely steady. She was going to think about that later, and feel something large about it. But right now, she just picked up her fork and resumed her dinner as though a thing had happened and been resolved, and life continued, which was exactly what had happened, and exactly how life worked. Colonel Whitmore touched his glass to hers, very quietly, just that. She touched hers back. After dinner, she found herself standing near the window, not against the wall, near the window, which was a different thing, and Sophronia came to stand beside her. This surprised her. Sophronia alone, without her mother, without her cousins, with an expression that was missing the arranged quality it had worn at the ball. She looked younger without it. She looked, Evelyn thought, tired. "I owe you something," Sophronia said. Evelyn waited. "The letter. Frederick told me about it. The original, I mean, before it was distributed. I knew it was going out." She paused. "I did not write it, but I knew." "I know you didn't write it," Evelyn said. "That doesn't—" "No," Evelyn agreed. "It doesn't excuse it. But it is a meaningful distinction. Knowing a thing is wrong and doing it anyway is not the same as originating it." She looked at her steadily. "What do you want, Lady Sophronia, from this conversation?" Sophronia was quiet for a moment. "I want to say that I am sorry for my part in it, and I want you to know—" She stopped, started again. "My father's arrangement with the Blackwood debt is not something I was fully aware of. I knew he favored a match. I did not know the financial structure behind it." She looked genuinely deeply uncomfortable, and the discomfort looked real enough that Evelyn believed it. "I would not have— I did not want— You did not want to marry a man by strategic debt management," Evelyn said. Sophronia's mouth pressed into a thin line. "No, I did not." Then we have something in common, Evelyn said. Neither of us wanted to be a piece in someone else's arrangement. Sophronia looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted. Not friendship. It was far too early, and the ground between them was too complicated for anything as simple as that. But an acknowledgement. The recognition of a shared truth. "He looks at you differently," Sophronia said, "than he ever looked at any of us." Evelyn said nothing. "I noticed it at the ball. Before I was angry about it, I noticed it." She paused. "He looked at you like you were the first real thing he'd seen in a very long time." Evelyn breathed slow, through the nose. "Lady Sophronia, I'm not saying this to be gracious," Sophronia said. "I'm saying it because it's true, and I think you should know it." She straightened. "Good evening, Miss Stone." She walked away. Evelyn stood at the window and looked out at the dark November night and thought about Theron Blackwood, looking at her like she was the first real thing. She thought about walls and shawls and 3 coins and the east wing of a house full of uncatalogued books. She thought about Latin learned by kitchen firelight, about a life spent being careful, about how tired careful had made her. She found Theron near the end of the evening, in the corridor outside the Callaway Library. He'd been speaking to Colonel Whitmore, and the colonel had just excused himself, and Theron was standing alone in that particular stillness of his. He looked at her when she appeared, and the expression he had was the one she'd been unable to name since the first night, the one that lived just past the edge of his control. "You held," he said. "I held," she said. "The table, Hartwell, all of it." "You told me what I was walking into." "Knowing what you're walking into doesn't always help," he said. "It helps me," she said. "I do better with true things than with managed ones." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "My grandmother sent word this afternoon while we were traveling here." He paused. "She has spoken to 3 of the families who received the letter. Personally, by her own initiative." Evelyn stared at him. "She did that today?" "She apparently began at 11 this morning," he said, "before we had even left for the dinner." Evelyn thought about the Dowager Duchess making calls across the county. 60 years of social authority deployed like a fleet, and felt something shift in her chest that she had not anticipated feeling about that particular woman. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't know until an hour ago," he said. "She sent the word through a housemaid. She said—" He paused, and something in his expression suggested that the message had surprised him. "She said to tell you that she does not approve of people using weapons against unarmed opponents, and that she has spent 60 years knowing where every weapon in this county is kept, and she saw no reason not to use that knowledge usefully." Evelyn stood in the corridor and thought about that for a long moment. "She is remarkable," she said finally. "She is terrifying," he said. "But yes." They stood in a quiet that had the quality of something that had come through a long, difficult passage and arrived somewhere steadier on the other side. "I want to say something to you," Theron said, "and I want to say it clearly, not strategically, not as part of any arrangement or calculation." She looked at him. "I brought you into this situation without fully accounting for the cost to you," he said. "I have tried to address the practical consequences as they arrived. I will continue to do so. But I want you to know—" He stopped, started again, which she had learned he did only when the words were ones he hadn't prepared. "I want you to know that what began as an impulse at a ball has become something else in 2 days. Something I did not expect and do not entirely know what to do with. And I am not a man who says things like that." "No," she said. "You're not." "Which should give it some weight." "It does," she said. "Considerable weight." "I'm not asking you for anything tonight," he said. "I want to be clear about that. The position is real. The library is real. If you decide in a month that this," he gestured, a small gesture that encompassed everything, "is not something you want, I will honor that. But I wanted you to know, before we leave this house tonight, where I am, what I am actually—" he paused once more. "What I am actually hoping for." Evelyn Stone looked at Theron Blackwood in the corridor of the Calloway house on a Thursday evening in November, with the noise of a dinner party on one side of the wall and the cold dark of a Virginia night on the other. And she thought about all the careful things she had always done to stay safe. She thought about how safe had felt lately, whether it had been working. "I'm going to tell you something," she said, "that I have not told anyone." He waited. "When I was 17, reading Latin in that kitchen at 4 a.m, she said, what I was reading was not just vocabulary and grammar. I was reading about people who had done things that were larger than what was expected of them, who had gone somewhere they had no map for and found something true on the other side." She paused. "I spent a long time telling myself that was just a book, that it was pretty words about dead people and had nothing to do with me." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not sure I believe that anymore." He looked back at her with those winter-gray eyes that gave away almost nothing, but were, right now, giving away something. "You should know," he said carefully, "that the debts on the estate are not insurmountable. My solicitor and I have been restructuring the notes for 8 months. Within 2 years, Blackwood Hall will be clear." He paused. "I told you about them because you deserved the truth, not because they are the defining feature of the situation." "I know that," she said. "I knew that when you told me." "And you stayed anyway." "I stayed for the library," she said. And then, because she was not a woman who hid from true things, and for the man who came to the kitchen door on purpose. Something broke open in his expression. Quietly, not dramatically, the way real things broke, rather than performed things. He looked at her with the full weight of it and did not look away. "Miss Stone," he said. "Evelyn," she said. "I think we're past Miss Stone." "Evelyn." He said her name like he was testing the weight of it, like it was something he intended to say again. "I would like, with your permission, to speak to you properly. About the future. Not tonight. Tonight has been enough. But soon." "Yes," she said, simply, without qualification. The word sat between them in the corridor, and it was a different word than the "all rights" and "I supposes" and "I'll considers" she had been giving since the east wall of the Ashworth ballroom. It was a word that pointed somewhere forward. They returned to the dining room for the last course, and she sat in her place and ate and spoke to Colonel Whitmore and to the woman on her other side, whose name she had learned was Mrs. Penhaligon, and who had a dry wit and absolutely no patience for Frederick Hartwell, which Evelyn found endearing. Sophronia's family left before the final course. Arthur Hartwell did not reappear. At 10 o'clock, the Calloway house began the gradual unwinding of a successful evening. Carriages called, coats retrieved, the particular warm noise of departures. Colonel Whitmore shook Evelyn's hand with both of his and said, "You did well tonight, Miss Stone. I've seen men with considerably more ammunition fold faster." "Thank you, Colonel. Come and call on my wife," he said. "She will want to meet you. She has strong opinions about the Caldwell family's treatment of scholarly employees." He raised an eyebrow. "News travels." She watched him go and thought about news and the way it traveled, and how for the first time in her life she was not only hoping it would travel to her disadvantage. In the carriage going home, and she noticed that she thought home without correcting it, Theron sat across from her in the dark and the quiet, and said nothing for a long time. And she said nothing either, and it was the best silence she had had in recent memory. Then he said, The south wall. She looked at him. What about it? You said it would take a week. At least. And after the south wall? The east wall, she said. And then the matter of your grandfather's organizational philosophy, which is going to require significant negotiation between what he intended and what actually makes sense. He's dead, Theron said. The negotiation may be one-sided. Good, she said. I prefer to win. He made a sound, a short, genuine, unpracticed sound that was unmistakably a laugh. Real and unguarded and entirely unmanaged. She felt it land somewhere in her chest and stay there. She looked out the window at the dark Virginian night moving past, at the frost on the grass catching whatever light was available and throwing it back, at a world that had been completely the same 3 days ago and was now entirely rearranged. She thought about who she had been at 7 o'clock on the night of the Ashworth ball, standing against the east wall, holding a shawl, praying to go unnoticed. She thought about who she was right now, in this carriage, on this road, with this man across from her whose laugh was unguarded and whose debts were being restructured, and whose library had 3 first editions on the south wall that she hadn't told him about yet because they needed verification first. She thought, this is what it feels like when careful finally pays off. Not in the small way, not in the survive the night, make it to morning way that careful had always paid off before, but in the large way, the way where the thing you built your whole life protecting, your honesty, your spine, your refusal to disappear entirely no matter how many walls you were asked to stand against, turns out to have been worth every coin it cost. She reached into her coat pocket. The 3 coins were still there. She looked at them in her palm for a moment. Then she closed her hand around them and kept them there. She was going to keep them. Not out of fear, not as a reminder of what she might return to, but as a record of what she had come from, and what it had taken, and the fact that the woman who had stood against that wall and survived every world she had been placed in had also, finally, improbably, without ever once asking for it, been placed in one worth staying in. Evelyn Stone, the woman no one had chosen, had walked into the right room at the wrong time and refused to disappear. And in doing so, had changed the course of every life she touched, including, most importantly, and most permanently, her own. That was not a small thing. That was everything.